Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
I flew all the way from Columbus, Ohio. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right. First off, thank you for having me, Jennifer. And I want to just send a real quick message to all of you. Jennifer is my counterpart here in the UK, and when I invited her over to speak at our national summit last November, and she kindly accepted and said that I had to come over here, which was like really twist my arm, not a difficult decision. She knocked it out of the park. Without a doubt, she was the keynote speaker at our annual luncheon, and she nailed it. My members have been talking about her and the relationship with you all since then. And so today, on behalf of the CDFA Board of Directors, my staff in Columbus, Ohio, and myself, we want to say thank you for having me. Thank you for being part of our event, and we hopefully, my last slide is going to give you all a little bit of a challenge in how our organizations might be able to go forward. I also wanted to take a real quick second to say that I have some regrets. I have 3 children. Does anyone in here have 3 children? Okay. What is the chances that I could get out of the United States for longer than 5 days and have daycare? 0. So I am on a real rapid turnaround here. So I'm in here today, and I'm going to go back to London tonight, and I'm going to get on a plane and go home. So I do apologize that I can't stay longer, just scheduling. I'm missing 2 soccer practices, two soccer games, some musical thingamajobber that's happening at one of my kids' schools. But thankfully, my ex-wife is watching them, and everything is good for now. She probably won't be very happy with that when I get home. But I also have way too many slides today. We have, what, 4 hours together? 30 minutes? I flew 3,000 miles for 30 minutes. All right, and so these slides can be made available to the attendees later on, or you can email me and ask me for them. I'm happy to provide them to you all. And then I have some handouts and some documents that we can provide for you should you want to learn more about our organization. One thing also, at the end of this, I will be turning around and taking a selfie, and we will be tweeting that back to the States because our followers want to know what the heck I'm doing over here. And so I'm going to send that back to my staff and my team out there and have them tweet that out. So you're all going to be very famous in a second to my 127 followers. All right, so CDFA. Why did you all change your name? You were us, we were you. And for about 12 years, I got a phone call about every 3 months that said, hi, I'm looking for Ben or Bernie or Jennifer. Those were the old executives. And I said, you got the wrong CDFA. That's the British one, so call them. We're a 35-year-old national trade association dedicated to development finance. That is our concern, development finance. Not the other areas of economic development or city planning or regional planning or the tertiary pieces like workforce and environmental and whatnot. We are focused on finance. We do it with 5 key focus areas: education, advocacy, research, resources, and networking. If I'm going too fast, it's because these are marketing slides and I want to get onto the meat of what's really important here. So, like any organization, we have lots of training. We have a different finance structure in the US than you have over here, and without being egotistical, it is far more robust, and it includes a very deep debt side as well as an equity lending, direct, indirect lending, microfinance, etc. component to it. So we have to offer training courses in all sorts of different areas. Our primary area of development finance in the US is bond finance, tax-exempt or taxable bonds. It's the second most secure market in the world. And as we go forward a little bit here, you'll see how we use bond finance to drive economic development in the States, from very big projects all the way down to entrepreneurs and micro-enterprises. We also have a big legislative effort. We are the largest lobby for development finance in the US. My primary job as the CEO is to spend time in Washington, D.C. and to move Congress forward on things. As you can imagine, I'm in a tumultuous world right now, and we'll talk a little bit about the impacts of just the last, let's say, 2 years here in a minute on our industry in the US. But it's also important to know that we are bipartisan and we are very open-minded to both parties in the White House or in the Congress. And so a lot of times our efforts are to improve the laws, not to beat up on what's happening within those administrations. And you can see we have a number of different things going on. One document that, I only brought 3 of them, but I'm happy to give them to you and get you more. This is our transition document that we wrote for the Trump administration to come in. It's 23 common sense points on how we would think about driving development finance in the States. And so if you're interested in learning about our approach, we're happy to give these to you. It's also online. Feel free to download it when you get a chance. And that was released in December. We're also the top research institution in the US for development finance. I'm going to get real wonky here for a second. Bond volume cap. we measure and we record all of the bond issuances nationwide. Now, this is what's really strange. You would think that our federal government did this, the IRS. They don't. We're the only organization that does this. We have to go out and ask every state, what did you do in the bond market last year? Give us all your data. It's about 400 data fields combined. And then we publish those results, and they're used by the Congressional Budget Office for scoring the federal budget. We're proud of that work. We also track all of the state tax increment laws. We have a federal financing clearinghouse. And we also look at the infusion of impact investing in philanthropic and foundation as it relates to traditional development finance, which I'll get to here in just 1 minute. We have the largest database in the world with over 10,000 documents on development finance and all sorts of resource centers. I am so tired of quality controlling my own newsletters. We have like 35 or 38 different newsletters that go out, 24 state targeted ones, and then 9 very specific ones: energy, food, agriculture, revolving loan funds, tax increment finance, tax credits, and so forth. And those are all free newsletters that anyone can subscribe to. And then last but not least, networking. We do about 50 different events every year. You can imagine that taxes our team pretty severely. We'll do this year our national summit in Georgia, training courses, summer school, state roundtables, our webinar series where we have thousands of people come online and listen to cutting edge topic in development finance seminars. And then this year we're launching a new thing, our Federal Urban Finance Forum, and that is in response to the election of President Trump. To make sure that urban communities continue to be recognized by the federal government, considering that a large portion of our electeds are now from the rural areas in the U.S., the conservative rural areas. So we want to make sure urbans get their coverage. How do we do all this? This is really funny. This guy here is my legislative affairs guy. He's going to kill me to know that I put him in front of everybody else, but I wasn't putting my picture up there. We do it with a small staff. We leverage technology. Our goal is to get as many resources and items out to our network as we can. We have personalized attention to our members. We make sure that what they need is addressed, and if we can't find it, we take one of the 30,000 people in our network and we connect those dots. And then we kind of stay out of the politics. Now, I'm on foreign soil, so I'm allowed to kind of bash Trump a little bit. Is this being recorded? So let's not stream us back to the States if we can. But we do stay out of politics. We don't support candidates. We don't support PACs. We don't support sort of third rail issues. We're on the outside providing advocacy from a positive perspective. So, I'm from Columbus, Ohio. This is where it is. If you're not, anyone been to Columbus? One person, please. Yay! OH. You say IO now. There you go. Columbus, it's the heart of it all, which is how we call, we're right in the middle of the state, and we're in the heart spot of the U.S. Ohio is a great state. I've been there my whole life. Columbus is smack dab in the middle. We are the state capital, and we are, you probably don't know this, the 14th largest city in the U.S. with over 1 million people in it, which isn't a big city by international standards, but for us it is. We are home of the Ohio State University, OH. There we go. We're getting it now. We might do that a handful of times. Columbus Crew Soccer. Yeah? You're all following me here? I was trying to connect. Football. Yeah, well, soccer, football. So we were MLS champions a couple years back. And then those 3 beautiful little boys are my sons. And I always like to remind you that we are all people. And so while we are talking about global and international issues that span lots of politics and complexity, we are still all human in our hearts, and those are the 3 boys that have my wife watching them right now, who I want to get back to. So moving on just a little bit, what is development finance? I'm horrible at time, thank you. In the U.S., we call development finance an effort to encourage and catalyze development in the built environment, public-private investment, physical development, redevelopment, or business and industry. We have a very broad look at development finance. Our scope is wide because we're trying to look at all of the resources we can to drive development or economic development or business and industry. It's an act where we contribute to project or deals. In the U.S., we're trying not to finance the whole deal. We're trying to contribute to the portion, the gap, the portion that's missing in a project or deal that allows us to move that forward. Many times, the financing tools that you'll find in our toolbox are a result of environmental challenges. And I don't mean environmental as in climate, I mean environmental as whatever the community is like. And so Do you all have brownfields over here? Okay? How did we get brownfields? Where'd they come from? We all just woke up one day and they were there? Where'd they come from? We made them, right? I mean, we, at some point in our history, we were derelict in our duties, and we allowed industrial contaminated sites to come to fruition. And so when we look at finance in the U.S. using brownfields as the analog, we can't just say, okay, just use a tax credit or just use a bond, because that piece of land, that development, has something inherently wrong with it that does not make it attractive to traditional investment. So we have to create a tool that levels the playing field. So you'll find in our toolbox, almost all of our tools in the finance space are aimed at addressing the underlying problem to allow the project, the property, the business, the industry to rise above to where it is a marketable or a lendable commodity. And so a lot of the tools in our toolbox is kind of how we look at that. Debt, equity, credits, liability, remediation, credit enhancement, short-term debt, long-term debt, bridge financing, gap financing, you name it. We've got a dozen or more different names for finance over there. But at the end of the day, we're trying to contribute to those projects, help those projects move forward in a way that leverages. That's the real key here, how it leverages our precious public resources to invoke and to drive private investment. And that really is the big main goal of development finance in the States, is to get private investment to come alongside for the ride. Eventually what we want are projects, deals, businesses, and industry to get out of the public finance space and to get in traditional mainstream conventional lending histories. So we have something over in the U.S. that we call development finance agencies. DFAs are statutory organizations that are provided by state and local government to do direct or indirect lending. Our primary tool is the bond finance. And I will fully admit that I'm not up to speed on your networks over here and whether or not you have bond finance. Do you have bond finance in the UK? Yeah? Okay. I don't know how it's similar or dissimilar to ours, but the point is, we offer this tool which allows us to invest tax-exempt bonds in infrastructure. That is our primary tool that we use. But over the years, development finance agencies have also been able to invoke a whole bunch of other financing tools in their toolbox. DFAs are formed at the state, county, township, borough, or municipality level. And just to give you a sense of how of kind of what we are. So if you're in the U.S. and you heard about an industrial development authority, or a community development corporation, or a local development commission, or a local development authority, in my state we call them port authorities. This is what's kind of crazy, is you don't actually have to have any water around you to be a port authority. You can be in the middle of Columbus. We have no water. We have a river, but we have a port authority. And so really all it is an authorization that allows these entities to exist. We have them in every state. Business development corporations, development districts, you name them, we have them. So what's the magnitude? Well, let me clarify. DFAs are not CDFIs. Our version of CDFIs is a much smaller, much narrower landscape in the U.S. There's about 1,000 CDFIs in the U.S. CDFIs focus at the local level on community-based lending and economic development. And we are not CDFIs. We are DFAs, sort of a bigger, more robust sector. Many DFAs manage a CDFI. They have them as a subsidiary. And so that's just a clarification that's important for us, that we're not the CDFIs, we are the DFAs. Many of us are also CDFIs in that process. So just to give you a sense of who some of these groups are when you bump into them. Alaska Industrial Development Export Authority, Wisconsin Housing and Development Authority. One of my favorites, Economic Development Growth Engine of Memphis and Shelby County, Tennessee, Memphis, Tennessee. Development Authority of Fulton County, Georgia, that's Atlanta. Toledo Lucas County Port Authority. Now, these might not sound like anything to do with economic development or development finance, but these entities that I'm listing are almost primarily exclusively in finance. They finance built environment, business, and industry. And while their names aren't reminiscent of that or don't necessarily evoke that feeling, this is what they do. You can look down at the city level, Louisville Forward, Phoenix Industrial Development Authority, St. Louis Economic Development Partnership. And so part of the problem we have in the U.S. right now is a little bit of an identity crisis. We don't do a great job of explaining that we're development finance agencies at our heart. We manage portfolios, we do direct and indirect lending, we subscribe to a whole bunch of development tools. You might not know we're out there. One of the best in the world is the New York City Economic Development Corporation. And if you ever get a chance to go to New York and you want to visit with them, they're on our board. That's an example of a major DFA that operates in a major city, obviously. So what's our market like? 55 55,000 bond issuers in the US. So remember those DFAs? 55,000 of them. Now that's a little misleading because in Georgia, Fulton County manages about a dozen development authorities. They'll have the Air Authority, they'll have the Water Authority, they'll have the Brownfield Authority, School Authority. So they're managing a whole bunch of authorities within Fulton County. We are, within our market, we are about a $3.2 trillion market in terms of what we finance in the US. We're the second most secure market outside of US Treasuries, which means that when development finance agencies in the US finance business, industry, and bricks and mortar, we are a secure bet. We are not a market that defaults. In fact, in our history, the bond market in the US has never even remotely approached a default rate. We've never been downgraded as well. 100 years of formal bond financing experience. The first tax code of 1914 in the US had tax-exempt bonds as their financing mechanism. Our DFAs manage over 25,000 revolving loan funds. Most of them are focused on small business lending. 700 regional EB5 centers. These are centers that go out and raise direct foreign capital, direct foreign investment to put into US-based financing projects and US-based financing schemes. 1,000 CDFIs, and then thousands of banks, institutions, foundations, et cetera, that were within our scope. So what do? Tax-exempt bonds, micro-lending, new markets tax credit, tax increment finance. I know you might not know what half of these things mean, and that's not the purpose of this slide. The slide is to show the depth with which we operate. We issue bonds for 501c3s, nonprofits, charitables, historic tax credits. We issue bonds for manufacturers. We call them industrial development bonds, tax-exempt bonds. We do tax abatements, mezzanine funds, EB5. You name it, we have it, and we kind of have this big, wide landscape of tools. When we look at DFAs, development finance agencies, the groups that I represent in the States, this is what they tell us they do. So we did this survey. We partnered with Harvard Institute for Responsible Investing last year, and we did a study of about 400 development finance agencies, some of the best in the country. 67% finance energy-related projects, 84 target-specific business types of development. 55% of them focus on urban revitalization or have that focus. Many of them do all of this in one. They might be doing urban energy, or they might be doing urban targeted business development. 27% are now focusing on food systems, which if I'd have taken this survey 10 years ago, probably 2% would have said they were focusing on food systems. 35% are now financing arts and culture. And so we do a lot, and we have a wide berth in terms of what we're able to do and able to get involved in. That top one, 67% energy-related projects, if we go back just 12, 13 years, that would have been virtually zero as well. And it shows you the transition we're going through as a country in terms of what's important for financing. So the way we break down development finance, the way that we've approached it in our little world is to break it down into practice areas. So the first being bedrock tools. These are bonds. The second being targeted tools. And I got another slide here in a second that's going to explain them a little bit more. The third being investment tools. The fourth being access to capital tools. The fifth being our support tools. So what do these mean? Well, if you see here, bedrocks is how we finance everything. These are our bonds. The bond market is enormous in the U.S. Over 11,000 bonds are issued annually in the U.S., from as small as $3 to $4 million transaction to as big as hundreds of millions of dollars. The state of California issues 2 big bonds every year in the billions with a B. And those go to fund all their infrastructure, their operations, their police, their fire, their rescue, their states, their water, all that. But then smaller places, say like my hometown, Findlay, Ohio, will issue a bond once every 4 years. And maybe it's only for 10 or 15 million to have them finance capital improvements over the next 4 or 5 years. Targeted tools, these are geographic areas where we focus in and we draw a line around a community and we say, we're going to have a tool called tax increment or special assessment or tax abatement, or we're going to focus our financing strengths right on that area. And it allows us to use the tax scheme, the tax structure in the US to drive development finance. Investment tools like tax credits. Obviously the big one is our new markets tax credits. We have historics, we have energy, we have low-income housing tax credits, all geared towards getting investors, outsiders, to come in and make investment for market rate returns. Access to capital tools, perhaps the area that's most interesting to all of you, is exactly what it sounds like. Our loan funds, our mezzanine funds, our loan guarantee and microenterprise programs. These are a smaller part of our toolbox, but an increasingly growing part in our sector. And then the support tools. There are over 175 federally authorized economic development finance tools. And as you'll see here in a minute, there might be about 3 left when President Trump is finished with it. So when we look at development in the States, we look at projects being in one of these 5 buckets: governments, established industry, development and redevelopment, small business and microenterprise, and entrepreneurs. The idea being, if you're a DFA, put yourself in the shoes of the Columbus Franklin County Finance Authority, my finance authority in my town. They're looking at all types of programming and all types of structure to be financed. And so it can make their job daunting, but it can also give them a lot of flexibility to focus on different areas of finance. Here's a couple examples. Colorado Housing and Finance Authority. These are just some of the programs they run. Tax-exempt bonds, fresh food financing, new markets. This is the Toledo-Lucas County Port Authority. Toledo's in Ohio. My parents are from Toledo, so I use this as an example. They focus on finance, and you can see they have interest rate revenue bonds, they have infrastructure financing, conduit bonds, a 166 loan program, small business loan programs, better buildings fund for energy efficiency. And so while they kind of look like a port, right? Like they operate ports, and they do, what they really do is finance stuff. And so they function as a development bank. This is Chester County Economic Development, just west of Philadelphia. Again, going down to the left corner here, you see, excuse me, that they're focused on finance. They're building businesses, they're investing in businesses, they're financing first-time farmers, they're financing agriculture, they're investing. They might look like an economic development organization, but you can see that they're really focused on the amount of investment that they're catalyzing and the financing they're doing in their community. So, oh boy, that's an ugly slide, I'm sorry. I don't know why, I'm a little jet lagged, I made that last night, so let's talk about 15, 20 years ago, okay? We had what we were referring to as a vanilla economy. We were doing bond deals and tax increment deals and financings. We have one source of finance, and it was easy. We were booming. We weren't really checking the ledger. We weren't really looking at the sources and uses and saying, I wonder what happens if the sources don't show up someday. And you can imagine, you've heard all about our black eyes when it comes to our turning our backs to sort of the details. And credit was so wide open that anyone anywhere could get financed for economic development. 10 years ago, we started to get the pinch. The recession was coming. And if you've ever seen any of the movies like Big Short or Too Big to Fail or any of those things, you'll understand that it came in a tsunami of a way. And it wasn't just the housing market, it was everything else. The bond markets, Detroit, Stockton, California, declaring bankruptcy. We were looking at a situation where we had lent so much to so many that we had to pay our bills, and it was going to be really hard. So the project slowed down, project financing slowed down, the federal budgetary crunch came into account, we had sequestration, which means that we had to cut the federal budget by a certain amount across the board, which affected returns on all of our outstanding bond issuances, the stagnant economy, and then the big hit was the access to capital for small businesses, entrepreneurs, minority-owned businesses, just completely dried up, and it was gone. 5 years ago, we start to see post-recessionary growth. It's still a timid economy, but we're seeing a big infusion of federal funding through our state small business credit initiative into small business and entrepreneurs. Infrastructure started to come back. The credit remained tight. Now what we've changed in this 15 years is the credit quality and the way we review projects. It is much harder to get project financing today than it was 20 years ago because we really look at credit quality now. So the past 2 years, I can honestly say that the past 2 years have been, without a doubt, the most difficult in our organization's history. I'd probably be fair to say also in your organization's history been very difficult. First off, we have this very divisive national election, little to no direction, federal direction on domestic economic development. The federal interest rate, I'm sure you've watched this, we've kept our federal interest rates artificially low. So low that if you're going to the market, if you're an investor, you don't have a public finance tool to invest in. You're safer going off into stocks and some other system because you might get better returns. You're not going to invest in a prime plus 2 market when you can get that somewhere else and not take the risk in the public disclosure. And so with that artificially low, and this is under President Obama, they kept that rate really low. And people like me were saying, please release the rate. Create market need, create interest. And that never happened. And so we really stagnated that for a while. And we were in this waiting game. And then, if you look at our Congress in the last 2 years, we did virtually no substantive law. I mean, when it comes to tax reform, when it comes to energy, infrastructure, housing, farming, small business, we did nothing. In fact, by statistics, this is the most inactive Congress in the history of Congresses in the United States. They passed the fewest amount of bills. They legislated for the fewest amount of days. And if you ask me what they did the last 2 years, I honestly cannot tell you one single thing that they did that was substantive in the way of development, economic development, or infrastructure. And then the presidential election. Jennifer, you were in New Orleans, 1 week before 4 days. And we were all promising her that when President Clinton takes office, it's gonna be great. Right? Yeah. Well, first, my Cleveland Indians lost the World Series on Thursday night. And then Tuesday was a really rough day for America, if you don't know this. It was a shock to the system. Now, you can be a Republican or a Democrat, it doesn't really matter. And if you're a Republican, you think, okay, let's limit let's lose regulation, let's unlock capital, let's put money in private sector, and that all sounds great on face. But then when you ask President Trump to be the one to lead this methodology, that's where it sort of falls down. It's not at the Congress, it's in the White House. And so rates were increased. Within 60 days, the new president increased the federal rates and has triggered that he'll continue to do that, which the capitalist inside of me says that's great for the bond market, and I'd like to see that happen. Healthcare repeal, it kind of failed. I'm sure you all saw the headlines. I picked up one of your papers here in Cardiff yesterday, and it was just covered in the failure of healthcare reform. And to talk about that impact, if this triple-headed monster of a controlled Congress and a White House cannot get healthcare reform, repeal and replace done, there is no chance they're going to get tax reform done, which is our next big item. And this really puts folks like me in a waiting game, because we just aren't going to see the proactive, progressive efforts we thought we were going to see from this administration and this Congress anytime soon. Tax reform is looming, but without health care reform, how do we get tax reform? When health care reform failed on Thursday, it left a $1 trillion hole in the tax reform discussion. The new, I don't know what they're calling it, the new Trump care was supposed to fill part of that hole. It does not now. And so tax reform starts with a $1 trillion deficit to begin with. Things like tax-exempt bonds and new markets tax credits and energy tax credits are all on the chopping block. Taking away the C3 tax exemption from charitables is on the chopping block. All these things that are short-sighted for long-term efforts. And then this is perhaps the scariest piece of our news, and I'm going, I promise. The federal budget came out. It's the worst thing I've ever seen. It kept me up for 2 days, stressing out. I mean, look at this. Cuts the EPA by 31%, cuts the Department of Agriculture 21%, commerce by 1.5 billion, 60%, energy. It eliminates all these programs, minority business lending, the EDA, water and wastewater loans. This one's just nuts. The Community Development Block Grant Program, our oldest entitlement program in the federal government that gives communities really flexible, affordable capital to put out for weatherization and infrastructure and homeless abatement and all these things that are critical, he eliminates it. A $7 billion program, he eliminates it. Half of my members would have to close their shops because that's a big piece of what they do. Department of Transportation, Treasury, I know you're all interested in the New Markets Tax Credit Program and our CDFI fund. He defunds it. He eliminates it. We will not have CDFIs in the U.S. if this budget is passed. And then the Small Business Administration, a $43 million reduction, and gets rid of all of our lending programs for microenterprises and small businesses. This is what you call a panic situation. But there is good news. There is good news. And there's some, what's that? Yeah, smaller slide. With sort of adversity comes opportunity. Europe's come to the US. We're doing P3 now. It took us, how old are we, 236 years or whatever it is? But we finally figured out that you all do public-private partnerships in Europe very efficiently. And guess what? We brought that model over. It only came over about 10 years ago, and it's only been done about 6 dozen times. But we are slowly putting a public-private partnership model in place in the US, which is really amazing. EB5, where we're getting direct foreign investment. We now have billions coming in from China and India for direct foreign investment into the U.S. through this special program that was created in the 90s. Property assessed clean energy. This is where we're putting special assessments on homes and commercial properties to help them finance energy improvements through their tax bill, through a special assessment. We didn't have this a decade ago. Crowdfunding, local crowdfunding for infrastructure and for small business has really boomed. And not simply the GoFundMe type of things, but crowdfunding in an organized, structured manner by communities and cities and development finance agencies. Early stage financing. In the last 5 years, 48 states have entered the early stage market. By that I mean they've catalyzed funds to help support entrepreneurs, seed and venture, micro enterprises, et cetera. 48 states entered the market in 5 years, which is pretty impressive. And then blended capital, which is now taking on, and I know is a huge space of yours. This is where foundations are now investing in market rate returns alongside traditional development finance agencies. This did not happen historically in the US, and in the last 4 years, MacArthur, Kresge, Heron, some of the big foundations have moved in this direction. And then my last slides here. The great news, the president's budget is DOA. It stands no chance in Helsinki of passing. And so I hope I leave you here with, we will not allow a $50 billion reduction in domestic economic development to happen in the US. It simply will not happen. And so it's dead on arrival. Local development finance agencies are taking control of their future. Instead of relying on the federal government for all of our financing, they're saying, you know what, forget that. We're going to do it on our own. We're going to invest in what's important to us, and we're not going to rely on these grants and this strings-attached federal financing. Tax exempts had a robust year last year. Now, some would say that the reason bonds did so well last year was because they were afraid of what was going to happen in 2017, which is a flight to market, absolutely. But we are proud to say that the bonds are having a great year this year, which means that the private sector is back into investing in infrastructure, business, and industry. Can you believe that rural finance is a preferred investment class? A decade ago, we couldn't get anyone to finance rural infrastructure. Now that is a preferred investment class. Why? Because rural communities do one thing and one thing really well. They pay their bills. And so that's a pride of theirs, and we now know that they pay their bills. Banks are lending again, and not that anyone's counting. 3 years, 8 months, 23 days, whatever it is. Not that anyone's counting. So I leave you with a challenge. I would love to find a way for our two organizations to partner. Size is of no consequence to us. We might be big, we might represent a large landscape, but our issues and our commonalities are more important. We would love to figure out a way to build an access to capital education and network component with you. Look at education, best practices, research. We can learn a lot from you. 6 years ago, I proposed a project to the Thurgood Marshall Fund to explore, and Ben actually helped me with this, to explore micro-enterprise finance in the UK and Europe. Unfortunately, it was turned down, but I did make it to the finalists. Maybe we rebirth that and we look at a way for our two organizations to do a transatlantic exploration. I do apologize I took 7 extra minutes, but I appreciate you having me here. And from all of us over there, we say thank you for having us and for including us as part of your conference. Thank you.